if you've attended many trainings or been involved in the training process much, people will certainly notice the different types of trances, the learning trances that people go into. And I've seen as many different learning trances as I've seen people in trainings. One thing I've learned though, one common denominator when you're in a state of learning and your unconscious mind is allowing things just to wash over you and reshape your understandings, while your conscious mind can go and take an enjoyable walk down some wonderful path in a forest or down a beach, a beautiful white beach, and your unconscious mind is absorbing very deeply and processing very deeply the information that it's being presented with and ways that it can manage and use, and will at the appropriate time release back into consciousness in the appropriate and sufficient degree that that person who possesses that unconscious mind will be able to make the most effective use of that learning at the time when that's most effectively useful. Let's review a few points before you go to your training. The 7 powers of questions. We've shown this book several times here. This is an important book, and you can become amnesic to the suggestion that I'm going to be giving you at the moment and simply forget that this is a very important book for your unconscious mind to remember, and a very important book for your unconscious mind to learn over and over, several times over and over, until you completely begin to process this information and let this go into the back of your mind where you can use it most effectively. On page 52, the author gives us this quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. It's a very important quote, so allow your unconscious mind to pay close attention to what I'm saying. It is the nature and the advantage of strong people that they can bring out the crucial questions and form a clear opinion about them. The weak always have to decide between alternatives that are not their own, from resistance and submission. I'll repeat that. It is the nature and the advantage of strong people that they can bring out the crucial questions and form a clear opinion about them. The weak always have to decide between alternatives that are not their own. So let's go to the deeper level of the meta model, in the deeper levels of your mind, in the deeper levels of your trances, where the deeper levels of your learning happen, which are more deeply impactful on the way your life unfolds. The canonical form of this question will be, what is this an example of? All right, that's our canonical form, that's our structural form in logical level language. What is this an example of? What is this an example of? What is this an example of? But let's expand on that. We'll take that to another level and ask this question as well. What does that mean to you? What does that mean to you? What is this an example of? What does that mean to you? The third way to look at this and listen to it and feel it is, what is important about blank? What is important about blank? What is this an example of? What does that mean to you? What is important about this? Then ask this question. What happens if we remove this element from the system? What happens if we remove this element from the system? then we ask this question: what do you think about that belief? And it might be even better to ask, how do you think about that belief? How do you think about that belief when you apply it to yourself? How do you think about that belief when you apply it to yourself? And the reality frame challenge: how would you know if that weren't so? How would you know if that weren't so? And of course, a beautiful final question is, what does that explain? What does that explain? So we'll run from the top to the bottom on this. And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 question forms that we are expanding from the canonical question, what is that an example of? What does that mean to you? What is that an example of? What does that mean to you? What is important about that? What if we removed that element from the system? What do you think about that belief when you apply it to yourself? Well, what do you think about that belief when you apply it to yourself? People have all kinds of beliefs about other people, but what happens when you apply that belief to yourself? Something from the Dilt sleight of mouth structure. And this is the reality frame test. How would you know if that weren't so? And that's a very important question. How would you know? In the terms of the process thinking, how would you know if that weren't so? And finally, what does that explain? What does that explain? How does that explain something? What is the condition? What is the fact? What is the event that explains? How does that piece explain the rest? How does that serve as an explanation? All right, so let those questions tick through your unconscious mind, and you might want to write them down. You might want to just simply watch the tube 2 or 3 times till you really have internalized it. But those are very good questions to apply to yourself, to let work deeply in your unconscious mind, and to apply to situations, information, people, conditions, things that arise in your mind. So you can ask these empowering questions, these probing questions. Questions are very good probing tools. So when we say the powers of questions, I'm going to go to another quote here, and this is on page 83. It's a very interesting quote from a guy named Larry Wilson. He says, "Knowing is the enemy of learning." We've all got to be learners. Learners are people who are constantly questioning everything all the time, including, and with most difficulty, their own assumptions about what they know and what they don't know. Now, this is very important point, and I think in the back of your mind, your unconscious mind will fully support you repeating those questions and asking yourself this question and posing this challenge to your thinking at a very deep level, at a profound level of your being. Knowing is the enemy of learning. We've all got to be learners. Learners are people who constantly question everything all the time, including, and with most difficulty, their own assumptions about what they know and what they don't know. Okay, that thing I just quoted you, what is that an example of? What is that quote an example of? What does it mean to you? What is important about that quote that I just gave you? What if we removed that element from the system? What if we removed that kind of thinking from the system? What would we be left with? What would the system function like, minus that piece of insight? What do you think about that belief? What do you think about the beliefs expressed in that quote when you apply it to yourself? How would you know if what I just quoted you weren't so? How would you know if that quote was false, if it weren't true? And what does that quote explain? So that's part of your learning structure, your unconscious learning structure. So go with that. Maybe go with that in your dreams. Just let that stuff arise, take notes, process it, learn it deeply. It will change your life.